Tom Everett. I've known Tom for a long, long time. Tom has been with Federal Highways for 34 years.
Thank you, Bruce, and good morning, everybody. Greetings from Washington, D.C. I appreciate the invitation to come talk to you today. It's sort of like a reunion for me to see many of you who I haven't seen in a number of years. It's probably been 5 or 6 since I've been out of the bridge community. This conference is a great opportunity, though, to interact with other experts in the field. You've got academia here, you've got industry, you've got government, and you know, we got hundreds of thousands of bridges to be thinking about preserving as we go forward. So what a great opportunity for you all to be sharing your knowledge, your expertise. And for me, usually the best thing I get out of these kind of conferences is the networking and the discussions you have outside the room and in the hall. So I encourage you to take part in that as well. I want to accomplish 3 things in my comments this morning. I want to just give you a very quick overview of the President's Infrastructure Initiative. You've probably been hearing about that in the press. I'm not going to go into much detail, and I'm not certainly going to offer any opinions. You can form your own. There were 6 principles, and I'll touch on those 6. I want to talk a little bit about what FHWA has been doing in the bridge preservation area, and then I want to leave you with a few challenges. So first, before I get into that, I wanted to share some good news from the omnibus appropriations bill that was passed by Congress just a week or so ago. I say it's good news because it involves more money for bridges. So it started at $1.3 trillion to fund 12 agencies. You know, these omnibus bills are what keeps the government running. $47.5 billion of that is for highways. Most of that was just the FAST Act amount that was authorized by Congress, but there was a $2.525 billion increase in FAST Act levels. So more money for highways, that's a good thing. $2 billion worth of that 2.5 was to be funneled through one of our core programs. It's known as the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. If not, don't worry about it. It's just an established existing program. They just put more money into it and restricted the eligibilities a little bit. Don't worry about the details. I'll get to the good part here in a second. $300 million of that goes to our federal lands and tribal program. So we have a program that works with federal agencies that own highways and bridges. And so they get $300 million out of that bump up. And the good part, $225 million for a new discretionary bridge program. It's limited to those states that have a population density of less than 100 individuals per square mile. By our math, that's 25 states. It's based on, I think, the 2010 census. And it's limited also to the rehabilitation and replacement of bridges. So not necessarily preservation. But the good thing to me is if you're one of those states and you had already budgeted money for preservation, and now, or for rehab and rehabilitation, I should say, and now you can get a piece of this money, then you've just freed up some money that you could theoretically use for preservation. So, good opportunity if you happen to be one of those 25 states. There'll be more information on that coming out, obviously, once the details of the program are worked out. It'll be one of those competitive programs where you have to apply and get a grant from the government. So that was the good news on funding. Now for the Infrastructure Initiative. So the President released a report in February. It was called the President's Initiative for Rebuilding Infrastructure in America. You can Google it. It's available online. And it was meant to be a framework for discussion. And if you look at it that way, I'd say it was hugely successful because there's been a lot of discussion, both supportive and opposed. But that's the way it goes when you put out some bold ideas. The 6 principles that were in this plan: stimulate infrastructure investment. This one you've probably heard about, the idea of investing $200 billion in federal funds to spur at least $1.5 trillion in infrastructure investments from states, locals, and at the private level, tribes as well. So that's principle 1, stimulate infrastructure investment. Principle 2, invest in rural America. So the proposal was to invest $50 billion of federal funds to rebuild and modernize infrastructure in rural America. Principle 3, increase state and local authority. So empower state and local authorities to make those investment and permitting decisions. Eliminate regulatory barriers. You probably heard some move in that area as well. Provide needed flexibility for projects to be developed and managed effectively and efficiently. Streamline permitting. Definitely you've heard about this. Shorten the permitting process to 2 years or less. That's a huge challenge, but one that I know we are working very aggressively to try to accomplish. And then empower American workers. And this is reforming federal workforce development programs to build that workforce of the future that is capable of working with the technologies that are coming at us fast and furious, the automated and connected vehicles and drones and everything else I'm sure that you all are reading up on and monitoring like we are. They're the 6 principles of the bill, of the initiatives that were proposed by the President. Again, just to stimulate a discussion, to get some ideas flowing. There's a lot more detail in the report and several very specific ideas that I didn't get into, but I wanted to just share the high-level proposals. Just a little bit more about some other things that are going on in Washington, because in addition to carrying out our core federal aid highway program, carrying out the omnibus provisions I just talked about, engaging in the discussion on those infrastructure principles, we're doing a lot internal within FHWA and DOT to look at our policies and our regulations and our statutes to just look for opportunities to be more efficient, to reduce the burden on stakeholders like you all, and otherwise modernize our policies. We've got some that are 30, 40 years old. They don't make sense in today's world. So if you are into watching the Federal Register and looking for opportunities as citizens to provide comments to the government, you may have seen a couple from the DOT. It starts with the President's executive order in February. He required that each agency set up a regulatory reform task force. And those task forces are charged with looking at all regulations for that agency and identifying ones that eliminate jobs or inhibit job creation, those that are outdated, ineffective, those that impose costs that exceed benefits, and those that create a serious inconsistency or otherwise interfere with regulatory reform initiatives. Not quite sure, excuse me, what that one is getting at, but there are some other categories. But we have a regulatory reform task force in the DOT. It's been very active. One of the things they've done is put out 2 Federal Register notices, one in June of 2017, and they specifically asked stakeholders to identify non-statutory, so not in law, requirements that the department imposes that should be removed or revised. We got hundreds of comments and ideas, and not all of them were limited to the request. Federal Highway, just being one mode within the DOT, got about 380 comments that we're working our way through. In October, they went out with a very similar request and inviting the public again to provide input on existing rules and other agency actions. They tried to get a little more specific to focus the comments. Again, looking for good candidates to repeal, revise, replace, suspend, whatever. Again, hundreds of comments. And again, not limited to the scope of what was asked. But that's all good, because now we've got a lot of feedback and a lot of good ideas of things we're looking at. Some examples. We have, within Federal Highways, we have an office in every state. Many of you probably know this. And we have what we call a stewardship and oversight agreement that defines how our local division office will operate with the state DOT. And a lot of the comments that we got were aimed at revisiting those stewardship and oversight agreements to see if more things can be assumed by the states on our behalf. And so we're looking at that. Buy America was another hot topic as far as getting comments. We've got all these different modes within the DOT, Railroad Administration, Transit, Air, Highways, and others. And we each have our own Buy America requirements. And I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense, and neither were a lot of the people who commented thought it made sense either. So there are a lot of comments about harmonizing those requirements within the DOT. Again, we're looking at it now that we have these comments to support that. Totally different topic. We put out several performance measure rules lately. One of them contained a greenhouse gas requirement. We got some very specific comments about repealing the greenhouse gas performance measure. So just 3 examples of some of the areas where we received a lot of comments. So a lot going on in the whole infrastructure principles and reforming our regs and policies and practices within the DOT. Just thought you'd like to know that. There's a lot going on, which is a good thing. I'm also very proud to say that FHWA has been at the forefront of bridge preservation for a number of years. Bruce mentioned that. I am kind of passionate about bridge preservation. I think it is what we need to be focused on right now. We're not going to be building a lot of new going forward, so we got to take care of what we've got. I've got sort of a chronology here of some of the things we've done in federal highways. We support the Bridge Preservation Expert Task Group, which works with the states, the 4 AASHTO TSP 2 regional bridge preservation partnerships, TRB, industry, academia, in developing products to promote preservation. And an example of some of those products are the pocket guides. Raj, are they released yet? Okay, so they're coming. I've heard good things about them. I haven't seen one yet, but 4 topic areas so far: thin polymer deck overlays, cleaning and washing of bridges, painting, bridge painting, and joints. So these pocket guides are coming, and it would be the result of the efforts of this expert task group. In 2008, we worked hard with members on the Hill to specifically add systematic preventive maintenance activities as eligible under what was then the Highway Bridge Program. That may not seem like much to you all, but that was a huge accomplishment to actually get that written in law. And it was the start of recognition of the need to preserve our bridges. So I put that on the list because to me that was a huge accomplishment. Then in 2010, I think we took another very big step where we created a full-time position within our staff dedicated to bridge preservation. Prior to that, it was a collateral duty. And we've got the 2 gentlemen who have been in that position so far in the room here today, Anwar Ahmad and Raj Delaney, and you all may know both of those gentlemen. And then in 2011, we published the first Bridge Preservation Guide, another huge milestone. Then we continued when Congress was developing the FAST Act, we continued to work with them to get, they were changing the program drastically and really eliminated the bridge program and creating these other programs. We wanted to make sure that preservation was specifically called out as eligible under the programs they were creating. And we were successful in working with them to get that done as well. So it's on my list as of significant accomplishments. We've put out some guidance memos, and most recently on preservation in 2016. It's available on our website. And in 2018, we're going to be updating the Bridge Preservation Manual that I said we put out in 2011. And one thing I think it's going to be included in that manual is how to establish a bridge preservation program, which I think should be very helpful to you. It gives you the steps an agency can take to set up a program, and links it to asset management and TPM, transportation performance management, which I'll talk about in a minute. We've also done a lot in the training area. We've got 3 web-based courses: Bridge Preservation Fundamentals, How to Establish a Bridge Preservation Program, Communication Strategies for Bridge Preservation Programs. With that said, I understand they have not been very popular, but they're out there. In case it sounds interesting to you, you can go to our National Highway Institute website and find those web-based training opportunities. In 2017, we updated our 4-day bridge maintenance training class that we offer through the National Highway Institute. That's a classroom-based course, and it has a comprehensive manual that goes with it. So I'd encourage you to participate in that course if you haven't done so already. It's very good. So that's what I wanted to cover about areas where FHWA has been trying to show some leadership in bridge preservation, and more to come. I want to present some challenges to you. When I became Associate Administrator for the Office of Infrastructure about 2 years ago, I defined several challenges for our office. And in getting ready for this talk today, I went back to that list and just wanted to go through it and say, how many of these really relate to bridge preservation? And almost all of them do. So I just wanted to run through that. So I said implementing a performance-based program, because I mentioned that the Federal Aid Highway Program changed fundamentally back in MAP 21, where we condensed from a large number of disparate programs to just a few core programs. That was a major change. We also set up this idea of being less restrictive on what's eligible and instead saying you set your performance goals and targets, and as long as you achieve them, you've got flexibility, more flexibility to use federal funds. That's a big change for the federal program, big change for the states. Florida may be a little ahead of others in that area, but we're catching up to you. Anyway, it's a culture shift, and implementing that, a performance-based program, at the same time we're saying, you need to get an asset management plan in place and program in place, is a challenge. It's a challenge for us, it's a challenge for the states and locals, and we recognize that. And I threw that out there 2 years ago, and it's still a challenge today. I'd say preservation of assets plays a key role in asset management and in transportation performance management. So now is a good time to be in this field and to get engaged in these discussions. Infrastructure safety, at that time, we were just standing up a tunnel inspection program, and providing an appropriate level of oversight for that new program was a challenge for us and our staff. Also, truck size and weight impacts on bridges. But when we're thinking about tunnels, we're not talking about tunnel preservation yet, but maybe we should be. We talk about pavements and bridges. Why aren't we talking about tunnel preservation? Implementing risk-based stewardship and oversight. For us, that's a challenge as we're not growing in size, we're reducing staff, and I know a lot of the states are as well. You have to take more of a risk-based approach to the way we oversee these billions of dollars, both we and the states. So this is a challenge. It was a challenge 2 years ago, it's still a challenge today. Preparing for the future. We've got rapidly advancing technologies. I already mentioned some of those. The speed of information. When things happen, like a pedestrian bridge collapse or like a charter bus or hitting a bridge with low clearance last night, the information is out there in the public before we, as the people that should know about those things, even know. And so the demands on us, we're being asked for information so quickly that it's really hard to keep up. It's a challenge. It's going to remain a challenge. I already talked about the fewer people and a smaller budget. Workforce development, a challenge then, again, to keep our staff skilled on the technologies that are coming and the preservation practices, in your case, that are coming in the future. Durability and quality of materials. I'd say that's a particular challenge in preservation. And the last one I had was resiliency, essentially, but building our infrastructure to be resilient. So threw them out 2 years ago to the entire Office of Infrastructure, and I think you'd agree that almost all of those apply to bridges and bridge preservation. But I've got three, and I want to leave you with three challenges to the bridge preservation community from my perspective. You got to continue to work on ways to measure and communicate the effectiveness of preservation activities and of bridge preservation. So although most states are engaged in bridge preservation to some extent, measuring its effectiveness and quantifying that, not so much. I was told that 2 years ago Minnesota DOT did a literature search and a survey to try to gather some of this information, to learn the types and frequencies of bridge preservation activities, and tried to get information on measuring the impact and quantifying the impact. 22 agencies responded and freely shared all the different activities, but very few, if any, responded with the other part, how effective and could they quantify that. So work to be done, and I encourage you to take that challenge on and find ways to do that. Engage local agencies more is my second challenge. Local agencies own and maintain less bridge deck area. Their bridges are typically much smaller than the states. But if you look at numbers of bridges, they're almost equal. I know that Raj is working on a communications plan that can help focus ways to get the locals more engaged. And we even, yesterday in the TSP oversight panel, had had some discussion of ways to get the locals involved in the preservation partnerships. So it seems to be recognition that that's a challenge going forward. And third, keep searching for ways to do things better. I broke that into existing structures and new structures. On existing structures, I think we've got to continue to look for innovative ways to assess the condition of our bridges. Indeed, technology is advancing, and we've got to find ways to put that to use to give us actionable information, not volumes of data that we really can't interpret and do anything with, but actionable information and understandable data that we can act on. And then new materials that help preservation, encourage and allow innovation. Allow innovation to some extent. A finger points back to the federal government. Some of those comments I mentioned we received on our regulations and policies point to the way we address proprietary products. So I can say we are looking at that. We've been looking at that for some time, but maybe with a sharper focus right now, given where we are. So we want to make sure that we're not doing anything to discourage innovation. On new structures, I think looking at improved design methods. I know the SHARP program had R19A, a service life design project that was interesting. There's design details. We've been talking about jointless bridges for a number of years. Still a detail to keep advancing. Improved materials. We've got high performance concrete. We've got ultra high performance concrete, and many different rebar types. I know I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but we want to keep focused on these areas for new structures. So in closing, I again just use this conference as an opportunity to educate and inform each other, network, build some bridges in your relationships, and do the best we can to preserve our large inventory of bridges going forward, because the public expects nothing less. So thank you for doing what you do. It's important to me, and it's important to our public.
So the first one, the asset management, it does in fact tend to encourage and emphasize the importance of preservation in asset management. But the rule for performance measure for bridges, some have mentioned that they think it supports a worst first approach rather than preservation. And so the question for FHWA is, and I don't know that there's an answer to this right now, but if we were able to develop a national performance measure that really emphasized the importance of preservation, do you think FHWA would be open to changing the performance measure from percent bridges on the NHS in poor and good condition to something that more readily recognized the importance of preservation?
Are we open to it? Absolutely. I mean, we're always open to trying to do things better and to better represent what's going on in the country. I got to balance that, though, with the climate in Washington right now, which is not to produce a lot of regulations, not to undertake a lot of regulatory activities with the current administration. So there'd almost need to be a way to link the change to a reduction in burden or cost to the states, most likely for us to make that happen. And nothing stops the states from setting up their own targets and goals anyway, right?
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.